The image is clear in our minds. A hulking figure, low brow, heavy jaw. He stands in a cave entrance, maybe with a club in one hand. His back is stooped. His knees are bent. And his long arms hang down, the knuckles of his hands just grazing the dusty ground. This is the caveman, this is the Neanderthal. It's an image we've seen in cartoons, in movies, in old museum dioramas. It's a powerful, persistent idea. The brute, the evolutionary dead end, the shuffling, ape-like ancestor. But is it true? Did Neanderthals really drag their knuckles? The short answer is no. Not at all. Not even a little bit. The entire image of the stooped, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal is one of the most significant and long-lasting mistakes in the history of science. It's a myth born from a single skeleton, interpreted through the biases of its time, and then cemented in popular culture for over a century. The real story isn't about how Neanderthals walked, it's about how we saw them, and how our vision was corrected slowly and painstakingly over decades of new discoveries and new thinking. To understand where this idea came from, we have to go back to the early 20th century. The field of paleoanthropology was young. Darwin's ideas about evolution were still controversial in many circles. Scientists were actively searching for the missing links that would connect modern humans to our primate ancestors. They were trying to build the family tree of humanity, and every new fossil was a potential piece of that puzzle. The pressure was on to place these new finds in a neat, orderly line of progress. A line that inevitably led to us, Homo sapiens, as the pinnacle of creation. In 1908, a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton was discovered in a cave near La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France. This was a huge deal. Most previous Neanderthal finds were just fragments, a skull cap here, a jawbone there. This was a whole individual. They called him the Old Man of La Chapelle. The bones were sent to a prominent and respected French paleontologist named Marcellin Boulay. He was given the task of analyzing the skeleton and reconstructing what this ancient human looked like, how it moved, and where it fit in the grand evolutionary story. Boulay's work would define the image of the Neanderthal for generations, and almost everything about his reconstruction was wrong. He laid out the bones and began to put them together, and what he saw, or what he wanted to see, was a creature that was more ape than human. He concluded the spine lacked the proper curves for an upright posture. He interpreted the knee joints as being permanently bent, forcing the creature into a perpetual slouch. He even claimed the big toe was divergent, like an ape's, capable of grasping branches. He looked at the skull with its low, long shape and heavy brow ridge, and saw evidence of a primitive mind. The result was his famous illustration, published in 1909. It showed a hunched, brutish figure. The head was thrust forward on a short, thick neck. The knees were bent. The feet were clumsy. The arms were long. This wasn't just a different type of human. This was a failed experiment. A clumsy, shuffling beast that was clearly inferior to the graceful, intelligent modern humans who replaced them. And Boulay's conclusion was clear. Neanderthals were not our direct ancestors. They were a side branch, an evolutionary dead end that was too primitive to survive. And they certainly didn't walk like us. They were somewhere between a man and an ape. The knuckle-dragging image wasn't just a mistaken posture, it was a judgment on their place in the world. It created a vast gulf between them and us. It made them seem alien, stupid, and deserving of their extinction. But why did Boulay get it so wrong? Was he just a bad scientist? Not really. He was a product of his time, and he was working with incomplete and misleading evidence. The biggest problem was the skeleton itself. The Old Man of La Chapelle was, as his name suggests, an old man. And he was a very unhealthy one. Later re-examinations of the skeleton, starting in the 1950s, revealed that he was riddled with disease. He had severe crippling arthritis in his spine, especially in his neck. His jaw was a mess, with many lost teeth. He had a broken rib that had healed. This was not a typical healthy Neanderthal in the prime of his life. This was an individual who would have been in constant pain. His posture in life would have been affected by his ailments. He probably was a bit stooped and shuffled because of his arthritis. Boulay took the pathological features of one old, sick individual and interpreted them as typical for the entire species. He mistook the signs of disease for signs of primitiveness. The curved spine of an arthritic old man became the standard for all Neanderthals. It was a classic case of picking the wrong example to represent the whole group. But it wasn't just an honest mistake. Boulay's own biases played a huge role. In the early 1900s, there was a strong intellectual current that wanted to emphasize the uniqueness and superiority of modern humans. Scientists wanted to find a clear, linear progression from ape to human, with distinct stages along the way. Neanderthals, with their robust bones and different skull shape, were a convenient candidate for a lesser stage. Bourboulez was a leading proponent of this view. He needed the Neanderthal to be primitive to fit his theory of human evolution. He was looking for evidence of a brute, and in the bones of a sick old man, he found it. His interpretation of the feet is a perfect example. He claimed the big toe was opposable, like an ape's. But the foot bones of the La Chapelle skeleton don't actually show this. He seems to have reconstructed it that way to fit his preconceived notion of a creature that was not yet fully human, a creature still tied to the trees. So Boulez's flawed reconstruction, based on a pathological specimen and filtered through his own biases, was published. And because he was such a respected authority, his version became scientific fact. It was taught in universities, it was put in textbooks, and most importantly, it was brought to life in museums and popular illustrations. The image was just too compelling to let go of. The stooped, club-wielding caveman became an icon. It took a very long time to correct this mistake. Science is often a slow, grinding process of self-correction. The first major challenge to Boulez's view came in 1957. Two scientists, William Strauss and A.J.E. Cave, re-examined the La Chapelle aux Saints skeleton. They were armed with a better understanding of human anatomy and skeletal diseases. They immediately recognized the severe osteoarthritis. They concluded that if this individual were alive today, walking down the street in a hat and overcoat, he wouldn't stand out that much. Yes, he'd be a bit stooped from his arthritis, but he was fundamentally a modern, upright walking human. Their work was a bombshell. They stated, there is no valid reason for the assumption that the posture of Neanderthal man differed significantly from that of present-day man. The foundation of the knuckle-dragging myth was officially debunked in the scientific community. But old ideas die hard. The image was already loose in the world. While scientists were starting to change their minds, the popular image of the Neanderthal remained stuck in Boulez's vision for decades more. What sealed the deal was the discovery of more Neanderthal skeletons, lots of them. Skeletons from different places, of different ages and sexes. In the Shanidar cave in Iraq, archaeologists found the remains of several Neanderthals, including one known as Shanidar 1. He had suffered a crushing blow to the head as a young man, was blind in one eye, had a withered arm that had been amputated above the elbow, and had a limp. Yet he lived to be old. He could not have survived without the help and care of his group. This was not a brutish beast. This was a member of a compassionate social group. Then came the Kebara 2 skeleton, discovered in Israel in the 1980s. This was a remarkably complete torso and pelvis. It was a game changer because it preserved the parts of the skeleton most crucial for understanding posture. The vertebrae were there. The pelvis was there. The hyoid bone, a small bone in the throat associated with speech, was there. The analysis of Kebara 2 proved beyond any doubt that the Neanderthal spine had the same S-shaped curve that our own spine has. Think about your own spine. It's not a straight rod. It curves forward in the neck, backward in the upper back, and forward again in the lower back. This S-curve is a critical adaptation for bipedalism. It acts like a spring, absorbing the shock of walking and running. It also perfectly balances your head on top of your spinal column. Apes, who are not full-time upright walkers, have a much straighter C-shaped spine. The Kebara skeleton showed that Neanderthals had our S-curve. They had a proper lumbar curve in their lower back. They were built for walking upright, period. The evidence just kept piling up, coming from every part of the skeleton. Let's look at the body from the ground up. Based on what we know now, their feet were almost identical to ours. They had a robust arch, just like we do, which is another crucial feature for efficient long-distance walking. And their big toe was in line with the other toes. It was not splayed out to the side for grasping. Neanderthal footprints, found preserved in ancient mud, confirm this. They show a modern stride, with a heel strike and a push-off from the ball of the foot and the big toe. These were the feet of a dedicated walker, not a climber or a knuckle-dragger. Their legs and pelvis were also built for bipedalism. The Neanderthal pelvis was a bit wider than ours, which might have given them a slightly different gait. Perhaps a bit more side-to-side motion, but it was fundamentally a bipedal pelvis. The head of the femur, the thigh bone, was large and angled correctly to fit into the hip socket and support the full weight of an upright body. Their knees could fully extend and lock, just like ours can, which is essential for efficient walking. They were not stuck in a permanent crouch. And what about the skull? This is where the whole idea of a forward-jutting head came from. But the key piece of evidence here is a hole at the base of the skull called the foramen magnum. This is where the spinal cord exits the brain and enters the spine. In animals that walk on all fours, like a dog or a gorilla, the foramen magnum is positioned towards the back of the skull. This allows them to look forward while their body is horizontal. In humans, the foramen magnum is positioned directly underneath the skull. This is because our head is balanced on top of a vertical spine. Neanderthal skulls have their foramen magnum in the same place as ours, right at the bottom. If they had a stooped, ape-like posture, this placement would mean they would be staring at the ground all the time. To look forward, they would have had to crane their necks back at a painful and unsustainable angle. The very structure of their skull confirms that it was balanced on top of an upright vertical spine. Even the delicate bones of the inner ear tell the same story. The inner ear contains the semicircular canals, which are responsible for our sense of balance. The size and orientation of these canals are fine-tuned to the typical movements of the species. Studies of the Neanderthal inner ear show that their balance system was indistinguishable from our own, consistent with a creature that moved and balanced itself just like a modern human. So, if their entire body, from their feet to their skull, was built for walking upright, what about the arms? What about the knuckles? Knuckle walking, as seen in gorillas and chimps, is a highly specialized form of locomotion. It requires specific anatomical adaptations. The bones of the wrist need to be strong and locked to prevent the hand from collapsing under the body's weight. The knuckles themselves, the metacarpal bones, need to be thick and reinforced to handle the pressure. Neanderthal hands had none of these features. Their wrists were flexible, like ours. Their knuckles were not reinforced for weight bearing. Their hands were powerful, with wide fingertips and strong thumbs, but they were built for gripping, not for walking on. They were the hands of a toolmaker, and this is perhaps the most compelling indirect evidence against the knuckle-dragging myth. Neanderthals were incredibly skilled artisans. They crafted sophisticated stone tools using what is known as the Mousterian technique. This involved carefully preparing a stone core and then striking off a sharp, perfectly formed flake to be used as a spear point or a cutting tool. This requires planning, foresight, and a very high degree of fine motor control. You cannot create these delicate and precise tools with clumsy ape-like paws that you also use for walking. Their hands were made for work, for manipulation, for creating the tools they needed to survive in a harsh Ice Age world. The evidence of their dexterity is sitting in museums all over the world in the form of thousands of beautifully crafted stone points and scrapers. So, the modern picture of a Neanderthal is completely different from Boulla's creation. Imagine a person, but stockier. They were shorter on average than us, but much more powerfully built. They had a barrel-shaped chest and thick, strong bones. This robust build was an adaptation to a cold climate, as a compact body conserves heat better. Their skull was shaped differently, long and low instead of high and round, but their brain was, on average, slightly larger than our own. Their face was dominated by a large nose and a pronounced brow ridge, but from the neck down, in terms of their posture and movement, they were us. They stood straight. They walked with a confident, efficient stride. They looked out at the world from an upright, fully human stance. The myth of the knuckle-dragger wasn't just a simple anatomical error. It had profound consequences for how we view Neanderthals as a species. By portraying them as ape-like, it made it easier to dismiss them as unintelligent brutes. If they couldn't even walk properly, how could they think, or speak, or have a culture? But we now know this is also wrong. The evidence for Neanderthal intelligence and cultural complexity is overwhelming. They were expert hunters who cooperatively took down large game like mammoths and woolly rhinos. They controlled fire, they likely built shelters, they cared for their sick and elderly, as the Old Man of La Chapelle and Shanidar one prove. Not living to old age with debilitating injuries is only possible in a social group where others provide food, protection, and care. They buried their dead. While the exact meaning of these burials is debated, the act itself suggests a level of abstract thought, an awareness of mortality, and perhaps some form of ritual or belief. They used pigments like red ochre, possibly for body paint or decoration. They collected eagle talons and shells, which they may have worn as jewelry. These are all symbolic behaviors. They are signs of a mind that is not just concerned with basic survival, but is also creating meaning and beauty in the world. We even have evidence that they may have been able to speak. The Kibera skeleton included a hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone in the neck that anchors the tongue and larynx. And it is crucial for speech. The Neanderthal hyoid bone was virtually identical to a modern human's. This doesn't prove they had language, but it shows they had the necessary anatomical equipment. Genetic evidence also points to them having the same version of the FOXP2 gene that is strongly linked to speech and language in humans. The story of the knuckle-dragging Neanderthal is a cautionary tale. It shows how easily science can be influenced by cultural prejudice. It shows how a single, powerful image can take root and resist change for generations long after the science has moved on. The image of the brutish caveman served a purpose. It made us feel special, advanced, and destined for success. It created a neat, simple story of progress, but the real story is much more complex and interesting. The world of the past was not a simple ladder of progress. It was a bushy, tangled tree of different human forms, all trying to make their way in the world. Neanderthals were not a failed experiment or a clumsy half-ape. They were a successful and highly adapted form of human who thrived across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than our own species has been around. They were our cousins, not our brutish, inferior ancestors. We know now that modern humans migrating out of Africa met Neanderthals and interbred with them. Most people of non-African descent today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. They are a part of us. So, when you see that old picture of the stooped, knuckle-dragging caveman, remember what you are really looking at. You are not looking at a Neanderthal. You are looking at a relic from our own past. You are looking at a 100-year-old mistake. You are looking at the ghost of Marcel and Bully's biases, a caricature born from the bones of one sick old man. The real Neanderthals stood tall, and it's time our image of them did the same.